Yes. And thank you everyone who coming here. And I'm honored to chair this session. And our speaker is also my old friend, Professor Noburu Notomi. I think many people here already know him very well. And he is a well-known Asian scholar in Plato's philosophy. And today, during such kinds of a tough time, we are very glad to have such a conference. And this conference is the third ASEAN meeting of Plato Society. And actually, the story began with Professor Notomi. Uh, it's he who held the first ASEAN meeting of International Plato Society. That's in 2014, and now he is also the author of the Unity of Plato's Sophists. I think many people already read it, and also the author of other papers and works. And now he's teaching in the University of Tokyo in Japan. And let's welcome his speech. Yeah. Noburu, your microphone.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Yes, I had some problem. Yeah, thank you very much, Hua-kuei. Okay. And it's a great honor for me to give a speech. And as Hua-kuei said, the first meeting was held in 2014 in Keio University. He or she, some of you came, and we invited two plenary speakers. One is Professor Kim Namdu from Seoul National University, and the other was Maruturi from Italy. And 2 years ago, we had the second meeting in Taipei. Yes, you hosted. So it's very nice to have the third one in Korea, although we have this time some problem to come together. But it's the third meeting hosted in Seoul National University. Okay, and I thank all of you. I know some of you had a very difficult time to join the session, at night or in the early morning. But this is a problem all over the world in online conference. But nevertheless, okay, I give you my paper by showing. The paper which you already probably had in the compilation of the conference papers booklet. Okay, I start. Images and imagination in Plato's Republic and Sophist. 1. Basic questions about images and imaginary dialogue. Depicted says, obviously, we shall say that we mean the images in water and in mirrors, and also those drawn and stamped and any other thing of that sort. Sophist 239d. Images are familiar to us, but if asked what they are, you would be immediately involved in various difficulties. For example, if you answer that image is a shadow of things and reflections in water or in mirrors, someone besides you, let us call him the sophist, may deny the existence of such things by pretending to be blind. He may insist that he can't feel or touch any images. Now you might suggest that there are many artifacts called images, namely things made by craftsmen modeled on other things such as pictures and sculptures. Then the sophist may again reject your answer and say that he touches and feels these objects exactly the same way as other objects. What you define as images are just paper, stone, wood, and bronze, nothing different from materials around us. How would you answer? Then you might say that we have images in our mind called mental images in modern philosophy. But again, Your opponent may reply that those are nothing but physical responses or remnants in your neural system. They are real, but nothing special compared with such affections and sensations as sight, desire, and pain. You may maintain that he may maintain that dreams and imagination are vague and subtle flickerings of inner movement that are perceived at night or with your eyes closed. Indeed, the concept of an image, whatever you may think of the world, is extremely hard to explain with words alone. Then who is a sophist who asks us these formidable questions about images? He's an imaginary figure in our minds. Let us continue dialogue with the sophist on what images are. You may want to explain images by reference to some relation, particularly dependence. If A is an image of B, A does not exist without B. In a stronger form, A is causally determined by B. But the sophist will point out that not all causal relations are applied to images. Throwing a ball causes the shattering of a vase, but the two events were not in an original image relation. How about the causal relation plus sharing the same form? A painter draw portrait is made similar to model by a painter. Then, however, the sophist will only admit that they are like each other. He will add that not all such relations produce images. Parent cats bear the baby cat, but the latter is not an image or a copy of the former, as children are independent entities or substances. He will criticize us for being unable to give a proper account of images. The sophist may again suggest that what we take as typical images in nature, such as shadows and reflection in water and mirrors, are natural phenomena which are not unlike surface colors or glittering trunks of a tree or the glowing skin of a human face. Therefore, he will conclude that images do not exist. We thus face basic questions about images. Moreover, if they exist, we must explain how they are different from their originals. We cannot take images for granted. Can we repudiate the sophist argument against images? 2. Treatment of the image in two dialogues. This imaginary dialogue is based on the sophistic counterattack in the dialogue Sophist. To consider the concept of the image in Plato, I suggest that we examine the dialogue along with the Republic. The Republic is thought to provide the locus classicus of Plato's degrading of the image. The power of imaging, eikasia, is located on the lowest level of the epistemological hierarchy in the simile of the line. Also, the critical argument of the poet as image maker in Book 10 places the image as the lowest part of human cognition. In this argument, Plato expels poets from the ideal city because they create mere images, inferior reproduction of the original, and thereby misguide people. The sophist, in contrast, tries to define the sophist within the image-making art, and so tackles difficulties concerning images, whether they exist and how we can distinguish between true and false images, icon, likeness, phantasma, apparition. Thus, in different contexts, the two dialogues treat the image as a central theme. We should remember that the Republic discusses justice by comparing justice in the city with justice in the soul. The image becomes a philosophical issue in the context of examining the education of a philosopher-ruler, but more importantly, images play various roles in the whole dialogue. Also, the Republic scarcely examines the sophist as a non-philosopher. In just a few places, the notion of sophist is mentioned or alluded to, but is not the topic. As for the sophist, the problem of the image is ambivalent. It is certainly a main problem in defining the sophist. He is to be defined in terms of falsehood, image making, and what is not, domain on. However, whereas the inquiry fully examines the problem concerning what is not and falsehood, and finally solves these difficulties, issues concerning the image are not explicitly handled in the rest of the middle part. They are, so to speak, left behind by the dialogue's main discussion. Commentators disagree about whether the argument about the image involves ontological issue in the Sophist. F.M. Comfort, on the one hand, comments that the long discussion of the middle part has a bearing on the metaphysical status of a world of appearances. Comfort sees the metaphysical problem of mere appearances as related to Parmenides' philosophy, suggesting that many allusions to the Republic reminds us of the view that the whole visible world is only an image of the real. According to Comfort, the first problem is how can there be such things as these visible images of unseen realities? Then he concluded that, I quote, some accounts of the Sophists represent the whole of what now follows as a solution of the last problem only. But in fact, it covers the whole range of questions just mentioned. They are not kept rigidly distinct. Comfort did not discuss the problem of the image in full later in his commentary, but his overall view of the dialogue suggests that the discussion of what is and what is not somehow treats the problem of the image. On the other hand, the other extreme is David Robinson, editor of the Sophist in the new OCT, who sees no serious discussion of the image in the dialogue. He criticized Comfort, me, and a few others for assuming that Plato discusses the image in the dialogue. He criticized Comfort, he criticized a few others for assuming that Plato discussed the image in the dialogue as intermediate being. Robinson rejects any view that the Sophist is concerned with ontological or epistemological issues on the image. He interprets the problem of the image mentioned in the dialogue as merely a sophistic puzzle. He says that, I quote, there is no room in the solution offered later in the dialogue for a theory that Eidora have a special metaphysical status in the virtue of falling between being and not being, because the solution is not solely on primary focus on Eidora, end quote. Complex textual issues aside, Robinson rejects my interpretation of the whole argument in 240b. I keep the major manuscript reading as presenting the true description of image as follows. First, an image or likeness are not really is F. That is not the original. It is different from the original. Second, it is false to say that an image really is not F. It is not completely different from the original either. Third, we can say that an image is F in a certain way. For example, the statue of Socrates is not Socrates, is not non-Socrates, and is Socrates. So I conclude that at this stage of the dialogue, the threefold description may sound puzzling, but will retrospectively turn out to be a true definition of the image. Locating the argument of the image in the Sophist is critical, and I located it somewhere between Comfort and Robinson. I also discussed image making in the two dialogues in my article published 2011. I examined the intertextuality between the two texts concerning image making and imitation, and showed that the parallelism is carefully designed to explain two types of non-philosophers, namely a poet and a sophist, the latter perhaps more formidable than the former. This intertextuality provides strong evidence against Robinson's negative view, who isolates the Sophist from the Republic and see no relation between them. In my view, the Sophist explores the concept of the image in terms of what is and what is not by taking over the issue of the image from the Republic. However, the two dialogues have a crucial difference. While the Republic shows ontological and epistemological hierarchy or degree of reality from what perfectly is to what is not in books 5 to 7 and book 10, the Sophists investigate more complex issues. The highest and lowest states of hierarchy, namely what is and what is not, are cross-examined. The dialogue demonstrates that what is not cannot be spoken or even thought of, and what is alone itself by itself also cannot be grasped or spoken. The focus is then a proper mixture of what is and what is not. Therefore, whereas the Republic simply assumes the object of opinion, doxa, as being somewhere in the middle of what is and what is not, the Sophist faces theoretical difficulties concerning such intermediate object and try to solve the question of how what is and what is not are combined to make images. Instead of discussing the ontological hierarchy, therefore, the Sophist raises the basic problem of existence of images, as shown in the imaginary dialogue at the beginning of this paper. Part 3, Parmenidean backwards. What do the examination of the image in the two dialogues have in common? I suggest that Parmenides is a key to the philosophical treatment of the image in both. Plato presented the new account of our world by introducing the original image relation. Only a few earlier philosophers considered images. Parmenides was exceptional in this aspect. Natural philosophers before Plato saw the component of the world on the same level, but did not separate beings of different levels. The principle, arche, of the Ionian thinkers are major entities such as water, air, fire, and the unlimited. Empedocles saw the world of consisting of 4 roots plus love and strife. All 6 are divine entities working on the same level. In Anaxagoras' mixed world, everything is in everything, and the only unmixed thing, nous, is along other mixtures. The atomists exceptionally discuss images, eidora, but they are simply small objects in the explanation of a causal mechanism of sight. Pythagoreans were likely the first to use some kind of original image relation. I discuss it later. The clear pioneer of the original image dualism is, I believe, Parmenides. In the second part of his poem, Parmenides, or goddess, gave a plausible account of our world of opinion. He took a dualistic view, that is, pairs of opposites such as fire and night, and this dual nature was the image of one being. The goddess claimed that in fragment 8, line 60, all this arrangement I proclaim to you as being like a wikota. The two parts of the poem systematically treat the relation between the one being and sensible world as similarity. Plato certainly took this general view of ontological dualism from Parmenides. Further, I suspect that the views of both Parmenides and Plato were based on Pythagorean dualism in 2 ways. First, Pythagoreans believe that all things are numbers, or that they imitate numbers, though it is unclear which of the 2 options they meant. Second, they try to explain this world in terms of opposite principles such as limit and unlimited and odd even, etc. This framework fits both This framework fits both Parmenides and Plato's world views well. In particular, Plato starts with conflicting appearances and separates the forms from these conflicting states of affairs. Later, Aristotle reports that Plato replaced the Pythagorean notion of imitation, mimesis, with his new term, participation, metexis, to represent the relation between forms and sensible things. Although the name Parmenides is never mentioned in the Republic, commentators normally assume that the argument of the forms in Book 5 is based on Parmenides. The argument proposes the triad, what is not, what perfectly is, and what is and is not, are corresponding to 3 cognitive states, namely ignorance, knowledge, and opinion. While the first is ignored, the second is thought to concern the transcendental forms, and the third is proved to deal with the sensible world. Both the scheme and the vocabulary are common to Parmenides. However, Plato's treatment and use of images are fuller and more complex than those of Parmenides. Plato could not straightforwardly look down on images and remove them from his world. In the Republic, Plato was deeply concerned about the sensible world in which we live, and he sought to handle the images in it. In the later dialogues, Sophist, Parmenides becomes explicit target of cross-examination for his prohibition of combining what is and what is not. I call it Parmenidean thesis, which leads to denials of the existence of falsehood, image, and sophist. Accordingly, the cross-examination of the Parmenidean position is expected to possibly solve the problem of image along with others. In other words, since the strong position of the truth in the first part of Parmenides' poem allows no room for images, Plato had to secure the proper position of the image, which Parmenides originally tried to suggest in the second part of the poem. The Sophist argues as follows. The inquirers, namely the heretic visitor and the Theaetetus, try to define the Sophist as a maker of false images. For this, the distinction between true and false images, likeness and apparition, is necessary. The distinction is made by reference to the original. However, the sophistic counterattack denies the existence of image and thereby denies the distinction between the original and the image altogether, thus demolishing the distinction between two types of images. He aims to repudiate the inquirer's attempt to define him as a maker of false images, apparition making. For he claimed, sophists claim to wise on all object equal to the God. In these dialogues, Plato treats the notion of the image in two ways. First, the image is not simply an inferior entity, but a transforming factor. Images guide philosophical inquiry by visualizing the target of discussion. Second, by distinguishing between true and false images, he can investigate the truth by means of the former, what I call investigative use of appearance in my book. The key must be spoken images, edora legomena. Plato sometimes characterizes our logos as a kind of image, but how does our logos relate to reality? To observe the roles played by image in the philosophical discourse inquiry, I use three examples, two from the Republic and one from the Sophist. So the first example, two opposite figures. Socrates says in the book 2 of the Republic, "Who, Glaucon, I said, how vigorously you've scored each of the men for our competition, just as you would a pair of statues for an art competition." This is a word of place, though it may sound exaggerated to modern readers. In the first part of book 2, Glaucon has powerfully described two opposite persons, the perfectly just person who never appears just, and the perfectly unjust person who nevertheless seems just to everyone. The description is spoken or written for us, but evokes a vibrant, vivid image in front of them, as if they were seeing two statues, sculptures, in an art contest. 2 points should be noted. First, the two statues are posited in front of the speakers and shared by them. We tend to think that mental images are private and different in each person, but the two images given here objective form. Second, although the speakers share the images, their responses to the images are different. Ordinary people and their representative Glaucon find the suffering of the just person terrifying and unbearable. Socrates, however, disbelieves in evil for just man, so no torture can ever harm them. Observing the same image, we have different, sometimes opposite, reactions and feelings. Also, the same person may feel differently later in the discussion. After the long discussion of the whole dialogue, the interlocutors become like Socrates, who understands what justice and injustice are, and therefore never wants to be unjust. How to see and react to the image reveals the viewer's position. Dialogues using images can change viewers' disposition and soul, or transform soul. The images Glaucon depicted, however, do not contain definitional details. The two extreme persons are characterized in terms of how they behave and how they are treated without clarifying what justice and injustice are. I suspect that the vividness of this description depends on having clear model in mind. The first one is seen in front of them, and thus, because the figure that Glaucon scrolls is most like Socrates, a man who, among those of his time, we knew was the best, the wisest too, and the most just. The end word of this Phaedo. The image of Socrates also appears later in the simile of the cave as a man who returned from his upward journey down into the cave. Socrates says, and as for anyone who tried to free them and lead them upward, if they could somehow get their hands on him, wouldn't they kill him? In this way, the statue of the most unjust person is based on the actual person, Socrates. I suspect that the image of the most unjust person, the other one, is the tyrant Gyges, as presented by Glaucon. He was the person most capable of doing unjust things without going undetected. Gyges was not seen because he was invisible when doing injustice and became a tyrant, starting the Lydian dynasty. The two extreme images of the just and unjust are further shaped into two types of life, the philosopher or philosopher ruler and the tyrant. The philosopher is considered the happiest and the tyrant is considered the most unhappy. Those images are not forms of justice or just injustice, but are vivid models of them. They show us what the forms are like. We can observe justice and injustice through the images of two opposite persons, illustrated by two perfect examples. The second example, the ideal city depicted in words. This is book 5. Socrates says, do you think that someone is a worse painter if, having painted a model of what the finest and most beautiful human being would be like and having rendered every detail in his picture adequately, he could not prove that such a man could come into being? Glaucon answers, no, by God, I don't. Justice is investigated by logos, that is, by depicting how a city emerges. First, their discourse construct a basic city, the city of pig, expanded to a more luxurious city, the feverish swollen city, and then purified the second one to make a model city in which to consider justice. We may call this last one the ideal city. Plato did not use the word ideal, the adjectival form of idea, but it is useful for us to call the city ideal. A form, for example, justice, is by definition changeless, absolute, and unique, but the ideal is a particular thing with details, a visualized form of the form, as it were. Plato often described forms as if they are seen or intuitively grasped, but the ultimate reality is probably beyond our description or verbal grasp. In contrast, the ideal is what we depict in our mind and express in words through discourse. The spoken or written form of the form is obviously an image. Thus, by form and the ideal, we can distinguish two aspects of Plato's forms, Platonic forms: the ultimate reality and its expressed form in words. Ideals are, as it were, what the best painter can produce. In the Republic, the ideal is presented as a model, paradigma, like a painter, a philosopher looking at the divine model imitated to produce works. In Book 5, When Socrates is asked about the realizability of the ideal city, he explains the model as follows. Socrates says, it was in order to have a model paradigm that we were trying to discover what justice itself is like and the completely just man would be like if he came into being, and what kind of man he would be if he did, and likewise with regard to injustice and the most unjust man. By observing such a model, we can investigate justice and injustice, or happiness and unhappiness. Therefore, while the main object of inquiry is a form of justice, Socrates and his interlocutors present the ideal city in words. What is not the form, but a model that let them contemplate the form. Like a painter drawing of the most beautiful person, the model ideal city need not actually exist in this world, here and now. Our particular ideals may differ across various times and places in the world, but they are nevertheless neither relativistic nor groundless. Ideas are particular models expressed in word to be examined, and they invite us into open discussion to undertake a common search for the truth, namely forms. Ideas as visible models can be many, so we can cross-examine them in relation to their forms, that is, the invisible original. In fact, many philosophers have long criticized Plato's proposal of the ideal city in the Republic, which started a series of discussion over politeia and the ideal city among ancient philosophers, namely Aristotle, Zeno the Stoic, Cicero, and St. Augustine, and modern utopian thinkers from Thomas More. These critics share Plato's concern for seeking the ideal and respond to him by advancing other ideals, images, or model of justice. We must then cross-examine these alternative images to see whether they are true images or false ones. The third, final example, the Sophist of noble lineage. The final example is notorious sixth definition of the Sophist in the first outer part of the Sophist. The inquiry into the definition of the Sophist already presented 5 appearances of his figure, and another one appears in the new branch of separative art. The sixth definition of the Sophist as a purifier of the soul raises a great difficulty for commentators. He eliminates the stubborn disability of learning, amatia, by refutation, erenkos. So many commentators, without careful argumentation, I'm afraid, take this figure to represent Socrates. However, we should not forget that the inquiry tried to define the Sophist as distinct from the philosopher, such as Socrates. So it raises a serious question about why this strange figure appeared in the series of the definition of the Sophist. A careful look at the description of what the Sophist does to his pupil shows us ambivalent features. So this is a quotation from 230b. In the discussion, the Sophist, collected his opponent's opinions and put them side by side and show that they contradict one another at the same time on the same subject in relation to the same things and in the same respects. The Sophist shows that the pupil's opinion are contrary, enantias to each other. So the refutation makes him aware of his failure. This may sound like the elentic method of Socrates in Plato's earlier dialogues, but we will find later that the Sophist is the one who abused the notion of contrary, enantia, to entrap his opponent in self-contradiction. The final definition reveals that the sophistic self-contradiction is only apparent because the 2 statements which Sophist claims are contradictory are not really contradictory. If so, the Sophist arguments are logically fallacious and the refutation is invalid. My interpretation is that the Sophist of noble lineage is not yet determined when the image description is given. Only when the inquirers inquirers succeed in clarifying the concept of difference, contrary, and contradiction in the middle part of the dialogue, does the person who correctly used elenctic method turn out to be a philosopher like Socrates? However, as long as these concepts remain ambiguous and unclarified, the sophist of noble lineage means a sophist who can deceive people by using apparent contradictions. If this is correct, the same description or image can be interpreted differently by different viewers. The initial image of the sophist of noble lineage cannot be determined as either a sophist or philosopher. We must determine the viewer's position, whether we, inquirers, are philosophers or sophists. The sophist of noble lineage remains a sophist for those who do not distinguish true and false apparent discussions, namely the sophist, while he turned out to be a philosopher to those who clearly see the distinction, namely the philosopher. If this interpretation is correct, the same image appears differently to different observers. For the person with a good and accurate viewpoint, however, the image of the sixth definition is an apparition, false image of the sophist, but the likeness, the true image of a philosopher. Accordingly, the difference between likeness and apparition is not directly related to the ontological hierarchy. All images are still intermediate between what is and what is not, but how they combine to make a likeness or an apparition is more important. For this, we must contemplate the original. So, conclusion. Plato's treatment of images in his philosophical discourse is neither totally negative nor simple. Those who can distinguish between true and false images have a criterion of the truth. In other words, those who see images correctly can tell images from the original. They have access to the truth. Thus, the philosopher should adopt a reversed argumentative approach to the sophist. When the sophists try to reject the existence of images to demolish the distinction between the original and the image and between true and false images, philosophers or inquirers should prove the existence of images and try to distinguish between true and false images to contemplate the original, that is reality. For this purpose, we should make images in philosophical discourse and examine whether they are true or not. This correct use of images will make us philosophers. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your talk. And anyone raise your hand for a question? Oh, now there are 61 people here. I need to check. Is there any hand? I saw one. Atman? Yes, please. William Atman, your microphone.
Maybe the host should unmute.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
you can.
Let me try.
There we go.
Yeah,
Just left me on mute. That's great. So great a paper, Noburu, shouldn't go unquestioned. So I wanted to press you a little bit on the relationship between Parmenides and Pythagoras in your paper. And so I think you're stretching it a little bit in arguing that the way of opinion, I mean, the distinction that you make, I think, is critical. But you know, to say that fire and night are similar to being a non-being, and because I think that similarity, that image is pretty important to your topic. And I don't know that that's really Parmenides' intent, to give an imitation of being in his doxa, which is deliberately deceptive. It's apotelos. And I think that you may have, I mean, I think that there's some apate going on in the way you linked the two. And I think that the locus of that apate is where you argued for a Pythagorean origin, following Aristotle, for both Plato's serious ontological views and also for Parmenides. And I think that the thing I want to press you on is numbers, because of course the Pythagoreans did not separate numbers from the material. And I think it's pretty clear that, and I think you will agree that Plato does separate the numbers, whether as intermediates or as forms, we can debate, but that he separates them, I think, is certainly clear. And therefore they are, so I guess I think I've said enough that maybe you have some room to run with on those kind of questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, well, you're right. And well, what I was suggesting was, before Plato, there's not many argument on image at all in the early philosophers. Well, maybe only forerunner of Plato's ideas are these two, Parmenides and Pythagoras. So as you said, you're right that this is not exactly the same as Plato's argument, or maybe more vague or very primitive than Plato's ideas. Nevertheless, I think that it's a kind of some hint Plato took from these ideas. The first one is Parmenides. The part one and part two, I can show you some example. The vocabulary of the part one of the Parmenides poem reflecting the part two, pelas or pelon, and that kind of things. So I think that's intentionally the Parmenides try to make some similarity, the kind of imitation, I would say, in the second part of the poem. So well, of course, we don't know the intention of Parmenides, but at least Plato can interpret the Parmenides poems in that way. So that is a question. So Parmenides himself, more controversial, I must admit. And Pythagoras, as you said, it's crucial. The numbers and things are different or mingled. Pythagorean ones probably very unclear about that. So numbers are things, or numbers imitate things. So in both formula appears, and so Plato was probably the first to clearly, cut these things, and the participation is. But nevertheless, it's possible that some Pythagorean ideas contain some kind of mimesis kind of ideas. For example, if this thing is number, I don't know, number 3 or number 5, then how this is number 5 imitates these things. So that's kind of very primitive ideas of Pythagorean. Again, Plato may have used those kind of hints, whether Pythagoreans themselves clarifies these ideas or not. So this is my suggestion. So I don't push too much on this point, but at least I see some hints in these thinkers. Thank you very much.
Yes, and then Professor Dominic O'Meara. Yes, please. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I just, first of all, I wanted to say hello to Noburu.
Yeah, hello.
since we can't see each other more closely. And I would like to thank you for your wonderful paper. I have one little question. And it has to do with the model. You talked about models. And, I wanted to ask you what you think the relation is between the model and the form. I think you distinguish between them. And so models are maybe ways we can think about forms. But can we talk about that relationship, model and form?
Thank you very much. Normally, scholars assume that in the middle dialogue of Plato's is a kind of paradigma ideas, or the model forms. I doubt it, and because the actual use of the word paradigm, and it's not the form itself, but a kind of more ideal, what I call ideal. It's kind of expressed form of the form. But of course, the seeing the model in heaven or in somewhere, that is normally we assume that the seeing the form itself or forms themselves. But it's very ambiguous about the two kinds, the form itself and the kind of expressed form, which I call ideal. So to that question, I must say that structure is more complicated than normally people assume. So this is the question.
Yes.
But the complication, maybe I'm not clarify enough yet. But at least the paradigm which you see, and for example, the philosophers see the models and create some the cities. In that sense, the both objects are in a sense on the same levels, which causes a certain argument. But so that kind of argument, if Plato aware of the difficulties of the certain argument, then he will say that model is not the form itself. That is my suggestion. Yeah.
Yes, I would agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And Daihao, you say you have a brief question. Yeah, Daihao.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Do you hear me?
Yeah,
yes.
Thank you, Professor Noburu Notomi, for your clear and persuasive presentation speech. I have now I can make my philosophies with images. I am assured to use my images in my philosophical teaching without worries. Thank you. And my question is very short and brief. The question that I often get from students in class, the question is, if you are right, and I think you are right, and what subsection in the simile of the line do you think the philosophizing, the mental state of philosophizing belong to?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, thank you very much. It's a very important question. First, of course, the simile of the line is very important, but it's not the final simile. Of course, a cave simile comes later. Well, how different is it? Because the movement is more important in the cave of the cave simile. The line doesn't show; it's more static. So I take it's a little bit difficult to say where the philosophers locate static way of maybe dianoia, but of course it's noesis dianoia. It's kind of we need is a more movement upwards to go beyond to using the image. So the my answer, my answer to your student is probably the dianoia stage, but of course it's trying to get a higher stage because the philosophers still use images and still use hypotheses, but try to examine them. So it's not blindly using the images as mathematicians, but. And yeah, we are aware these are images, but nevertheless, we cannot avoid, we cannot dispense with images. That is a problem with philosophy. So,
but when begins the dialectic?
When beginning, I think it's already began, because we are using words, and if we clearly separate, using image and the dialectics, which is no image, then we have to choose. But the dialectic, or using image, but we are just like mathematicians, we using image, but we are thinking of forms, and we are discussing forms, because otherwise, image themselves don't say any, clear ideas. We can make different kind of images, sometimes false images. So my ideas, and I cannot prove it now, but my ideas is dialectic is already implied in some stage in earlier stages. Otherwise, it's very difficult to explain where philosophy is.
Thank you very much.
People may disagree with it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so next one is John. Yang, please, your question, and turn on your microphone, please.
Okay. Yeah, so I also have a question about the relation of paradigm and form. So just to cite a famous, actually not that much discussed passage, but still famous enough, at the beginning of book 6 of the Republic, 48.4, around the letter D, where he uses the analogy with the painter. And so he uses rather emphatic language. So, I mean, people who don't have a clear paradigma, and I guess paradigma in their soul, and they are not able, like painters, to look at the, most true thing, and so use this emphatic superlative arithestaton and sort of copy it, or put something maybe less perfect into, a sculpture or a painting, or so they are not qualified to be philosopher rulers. So the normal reading would be to say, so should I say the standard reading would be to say that that's a reference to the form of justice, perhaps, or the good, and so now it's interesting that you now actually draw a distinction there between the paradigm and the form. So I guess you might argue, well, it's the arithestaton in the soul, or the paradigma in the soul. So how do you have a paradigma in the soul as a philosopher, through logoi, in words and arguments? And you could connect that with this image with this comparison in the Phaedo, where you where the logoi are around 100, or the reflection of somehow. So, but now here's the question. So if that's sort of on the right track, I mean, you also mentioned, and I'm not sure if I got it right, that you could have different paradigms for the same form. I mean, different thinkers could have different paradigms, and you gave examples. But so couldn't that mean that there are different competing arithestata, which would then, lead to, multiple truths of conflicting truths? Or what does that mean for the form, if any representation of the form in the soul is just a paradigm and not the form itself? Is the form something ineffable? So that's sort of the two questions, the relativization of truth and the question of the ineffability of the form.
Thank you very much. It's a difficult question. Of course, that's a very good question. I have to answer your first question by explaining how I read the central books of the Republic, Book 5 to Book 7. Book 5 is only a beginning, and it's not the final picture of the theory of forms. It's a kind of initiation of the forms. Then coming in that book 6, then the book 6 and 7, the 3 similes, this is the highest point. Then educational process. So that means, well, we shouldn't, or we cannot take the earlier part of the description as a definite, the final presentation of the forms. Socrates is in a sense educating, leading people to the the highest form. So it's the book 5, at the end of book 5 and book 6 earlier part of book 6 is still, I think, it's on the way upward. So in that case, well, the picture model, philosopher looking as a model, and that kind of description is all right at that stage of the stage, but we cannot take it as a final theory form description. So I'm sorry, that is my position. So we should be careful with the context of the things. That is the answer to the first question. The second one is more problematic because if the models are many or ideas are multiple, that causes a big problem for Plato, I must say. But what actually happened in philosophy discussion, what we are doing, philosophical discussion, is a kind of presenting ideals and they compete with each other. So, for example, if I say, I believe this is justice, and you said that this is justice, then we can cross-examine each, proposals, and according to the probably the absolute form, then we can change ideals or models to the better one, or maybe as a closer to the reality. That is my own views of philosophy. So Plato probably didn't use the word model in my way. So I must say this is too much speculation for me. But yeah, but the reason why I put the models in plural is like this. And one motivation of this argument is which Karl Popper criticized Plato. One of the point, Karl Popper in his argument against Plato says, okay, the form is absolute. We have to follow forms, the absolute unchanging forms. Then a kind of absolutism or totalitarian scheme appears. I disagree that kind of things, because we need some absolute form, Platonic forms, but that doesn't imply that is automatically totalitarian, automatically absolutistic views of the society building. So that is my hidden intention. Sorry.
But if I may just real quick, I mean, wouldn't that point to a sort of Ciceronian Platonism, as you might say, I mean, where you don't deny the existence of truth as a metaphysical concept, but there are only more or less plausible ways of tracking the truth, and what is more or less plausible might also change over time. Yeah, so a sort of moderate academics, Plato, skeptical Platonism.
Thank you very much. I haven't thought of it, but as far as Cicero is a skeptic academic concept, I think it's very similar to my approach.
Thank you.
I think now that's 6:13, and I think Yuri's question will be the last question. Yeah. Yeah, sorry for other people raise their hands. And Yuri?
Yes, actually, do you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So my question concerns actually what Noburu just have talked about. Do you believe that there are many ideas of one form? So if in this case, I think maybe it follows that a philosopher is a sort of eidolos. So he could be regarded as a maker of true images of forms. Is it right? So
yeah, yes, that is my basically. I must say yes, and why we have to we need to make images is one thing is we human beings are perspectival. We cannot definitely beyond, we cannot go beyond any perspectives. That is maybe time or space or culture, any kind of limitation. So, but the Platonic forms, by definition, it's beyond the perspective. So it's very difficult for us to directly, well, whatever we talk about or we think about the forms, it's already embedded on our own perspective. Nevertheless, we can change our perspective. We can improve our perspective. So that is transforming our souls, transformation of the soul. We can move from the lower stage to the higher stage. So I think we are making images, but that does not reject any absolute truth. So the compatible both those. So is that all right?
Yes, I think so. But in order to make a true image of a form, so maybe a philosopher should have first know the form itself.
Yeah. Well. Some people may say that we already saw anamnesis thing. Maybe, or it's maybe true, but I'm more humane. I mean, anthropine Sophia type. We know these are images. That is important, We are in the world of images. We can say we are in the images. That means we know the distinct difference or separation between image and original, even if we don't clearly say what is the original. So that is interesting. So just imagine, you said you are in the cave, without going out of the cave. That is very strange things, But nevertheless, you can say, I'm in the cave. So that is Plato's position. And maybe sometime we can go out of the cave, but we are now in the cave and say, we are in the cave. That means already we anticipated outside. So that is, so we are making images, but kind of anticipating the original. So this is my idea.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, everyone, and thanks. Let's thank Noburu again. And I strongly encourage you to continue your discussion after I close the meeting, and you can type in the lesson number, the same meeting ID, and then you can continue to discuss.
Someone put some question in chat, but please
right, yeah,
mind just in the discussion part, then I can reply more.
Yes, please, yes. And thank you, everyone, and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Yeah, okay.